FEDSAS plays an important role in the governance and management of all schools in South Africa, in the sense that there are so many legal aspects and governance matters in education of which most principals and educators still have limited experience. It is important for a school to be a member of FEDSAS, as not only are we the leaders in school governance and management, but we also train, inform, guide and advise all our members in best practice and experienced solutions. Who is FEDSAS? FEDSAS is the national representative organization for school governing bodies. FEDSAS informs, organizes, mobilizes, and develops its members to achieve and maintain the highest international standards in school governance and management. We advise within the public and private educational sectors, focusing on the foundation, intermediate and senior phases. The school's governing body, or SGB, operates primarily outside the classroom. It is the SGB's task to make sure everything outside the classroom is in shape, that infrastructure, discipline, budgets, human resources and finances are efficiently managed. FEDSAS can assist you with all the aspects of your school governing board's primary role, which is creating a conducive environment in the best interest of the school. Furthermore, FEDSAS can assist in strategic planning, sound financial management and human resources aspects such as appointment, discipline and termination of contract processes. When dealing with appointments of principals, FEDSAS wants to support you to appoint the best possible leadership candidates for your school for the sake of our children. Be a part of FEDSAS and know that you are part of a larger community that will always provide you with the latest information which is accurate and reliable. There is always someone within FEDSAS who has the experience of past challenges and solutions. Simply a call away. We at FEDSAS will walk alongside you to take your governing body forward to achieve greater heights. FEDSAS has extensive experience in education matters. As an active, dynamic organization, it is fully informed of developments and restructuring in the education field and can advise its members accordingly. FEDSAS is a democratic, non-political organization and members elect their leaders along the lines of the national school governing body elections. What does FEDSAS stand for? FEDSAS believes in maximum autonomy for governing bodies and therefore strives to expand governing bodies' rights, competencies and skills. FEDSAS supports and promotes governing bodies' powers and the rights as defined in the legal framework of the Constitution, South African Schools Act and acceptable governance principles. Former State President Nelson Mandela said, "Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. Education is a great engine for personal development. Through education, the daughter of a peasant can become a doctor. Children of mine workers become heads of mines. The child of farm workers can become president of the country." Here at FEDSAS, we do what we do because we love our children, we love our schools, and we love our country. We look forward to being of service to every school governing body in South Africa.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our session, our public interest session. My name is Paul Renken. I'm from FEDSAS. I'm based in KZN. And I see the numbers are gradually coming through. There is Dr. Jaco Deacon on board coming through, and we've got him and Jane van der Merwe from our legal office involved in our processes today. I'm just going to, let me just open up here quickly and get things going first so we can kick off while the numbers come through. Let's just get into the right processes here. So today we are going to be talking about the BELA Bill, or BELAB as you would want to pronounce it, the Basic Education Law Amendment Bill. And we're going to go through some of those details that we need to consider, where we're sitting with those processes and how we're handling them as we go forward. It really is an information session. We're going to be providing information. I'll say unashamedly so. We're going to be giving you as much information as possible so that you can understand where we need to go with this process. We are sitting in a democratic and a very democratic opportunity here for comments to take place and go into the education of the country. And I don't say that in any small way. It's a really significant step that we do comment and we do get involved in the process. Dr. Jaco Deacon and Jeanne are going to go through the details as we go through what it is about, so that you've got an understanding as to what the BELA Bill is about. We're going to be answering three main questions. What is good about the BELA Bill? What is of concern on the proposed amendments? And what should you as a concerned citizen of South Africa do with regards to the processes? I'm going to put that up there so you can just get hold of our provincial managers. We'd really like you to sit back now and take in the information that comes through, rather than try and find all the links and scramble around in the internet as we guide you to various links. We'll provide you those in time as we come through. We may not be able to answer all your questions that you then post in the process, but I'm really asking you just to listen to the information that's coming through. It's quite confusing. There's been a lot of information out already. Jeanne and Jaco will go through the details. With that, I'm going to hand over to Jaco straight away, and I'm going to disappear into the background and see who else can't get on board, help them get on board. So good afternoon, Jaco, all the way from Bloemfontein. How are you today?
Afternoon, Paul. Yes, thank you. With the winter setting in, hopefully you'll enjoy the session with us. What I'm going to do is you'll get the best out of the session if you go to speaker view. So I'm going to move to my slides, and I'm just going to be a small block somewhere in the slide. So if you go to speaker view, you'll get the most out of this session. Okay, when we look at the BELA Bill or BELA Bill, and that's the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill, and there you see the advert, and that's the wording, have your say, from the Portfolio Committee in Parliament. So it's not our slogan, it is the advert from the Parliament itself. To comment on this draft bill, it's not law yet, so this is our last opportunity to provide inputs and submissions to influence the outcome of this process. Most of the issues that will be raised during today's session would have a bearing on the SA Schools Act. Joanne will refer to a provision in the Employment of Educators Act. So this is not an act to amend only the SA Schools Act, but also more education legislation. So therefore it's called a Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill, not amendment to the SA Schools Act. But most of the provisions will have a bearing on the SA Schools Act as is. I trust you have a copy of the Act. It's difficult to comment if you don't read the proposals with the current provisions in the Act. So that's our point of departure. Get the original Act. If you don't have a copy of it, you can go to the FEDSAS webpage, www.fetsas.org.za. Go to our documentation, go to the link on legislation and download the SA Schools Act. That Act commenced on the 1st of January 1997. And before that, we had 17 different departments of education, and we had a very fragmented approach to education. So our schools, as is, our public schools and independent schools came into operation officially in terms of this Act on the 1st of January 1997. And since then, we had 9 amendments to date. Sorry, there's short an S on that one. 9 amendments to date. And interesting enough, in the first few years, we had basically every year an amendment to the Act. But since the current minister took over, Minister Motshega, and by the way, she's the longest serving Minister of Education in the history of our country, pre-apartheid, post-apartheid, it's the first time that she's involved in an amendment process in the education law. So the last amendment came in 2011. So to a certain sense, it's been long overdue. So it's not strange to see amendments to the education laws. So there's nothing sinister about the whole process to amend either the Schools Act or more education legislation. It's normal to go through this process. Well, there's some urgency now in the amendment in education because of a number of court rulings. And I think the most important one dealing with the undocumented learners in the system and what schools should do to comply with the court ruling in that regard. And then there's some clarity provided in the Act now, how we should go about. Also, new realities. The effect of COVID. We've learned a few lessons during COVID, and it should be reflected in the Schools Act. And then some of the challenges, those principles in the session would recall. The minister announced 20 years ago that I think it was either Professor Asmal or Professor Bengu, who announced that grade R will become part of the school system, formal part of the formal system. And it's 20 odd years down the line. So it's now fulfilling that promise made 20 odd years ago, but you are unable to touch on that. But the bottom line is situation changed in our country, in our schools and how we do things, even how we manage education on a provincial level. So certain amendments are really very urgent, and we'll focus on those as well. Now, the Bailout process, it's not a simple process because we can simply say we're going to change the laws. As some of the MECs would say after a ruling that went against them in court, so we're going to change the law tomorrow. It's not going to change tomorrow. It's a long process. This process started, the publication of the first draft was sent at the end of 2017. Even before that, we had an opportunity to see the document. It was then published at the end of 2017 for public comment. And then we had a huge campaign asking parents and school communities to provide inputs. So the document we are dealing with now is a result of the 2017 document that's being changed through the public participation process. It took the department by storm. Between 5,000 and 6,000 contributions and comments were sent to the department. It flooded the email boxes. It kept the department busy for a very, very long time. But I can honestly say that we've seen significant changes in the 2017 document since we've seen the 2017 document. I think the main reason is because of the public participation. Schools raised issues, organizations raised issues, and obviously the voices of parents were heard in this process. So again, it's important to take part. Since 2017, we had a number of internal consultation sessions with the National Department of Education. We had an opportunity to engage with the minister. Some of you would recall in the 2017 document, it was proposed that the government, the department, will decide on all the promotion posts, that the SGB will play no role in the appointment process of your deputy principal and the principal. And after long negotiations and engagements, it's no longer there. So I'm happy that we had good discussions internally, and there's still a willingness to listen to the ideas of the education sector. Now, the 2021 version is now tabled at Parliament. So we're done with the process from the department side. They've consulted at NETLAG, and now there's a document in front of Parliament. And what Parliament should do is, again, look at public participation, because education is both a national as well as a provincial competency in terms of our Constitution and the Schools Act. Now, this version is now at Parliament, and it's the duty of the Portfolio Committee to go through the public participation process. So they advertised and they've invited us to provide comments to that committee first. Then they will discuss it, and then they will table it at the Council of Provinces and at the National Assembly before political parties will vote on it. And that can happen, depend on the number of contributions. It can happen maybe before the end of the year, though I think the timeline is a bit tight, maybe early next year. And then after Parliament approved it, it's still not law. It must be signed by the president. So parties can then again petition the president to say, well, there are certain issues that needs to be dealt with, or issues of constitutionality raised. So when it's signed by the president, at that moment, it is law. So I think there's still a long way to go before we can say we've got an act. I briefly explained the parliamentary process. Parliament decided to refer this matter to the Portfolio Committee, and the Portfolio Committee debated the act already, and then they decided to send it out for public comment. And in the invitation, they also referred to the fact that when you submit your comments, you can also ask to do oral presentations at Parliament. And as FEDSAS, we're definitely going to do that. We know it's difficult for individual schools, and we've got limited time to do it at Parliament. So hopefully we'll get an opportunity to make the contribution in Parliament in front of the committee with our written proposals and so forth. So that's more or less the parliamentary process that will play out. So to a certain extent, the 2017 process stopped the moment the document was submitted to Parliament. And now it's the ordinary parliamentary process that must play out. And in a democracy, the voices count of the subjects. So it's our time to speak. So what's our responsibility? Number one, we need to comment. And you'll see when Yonne do her presentation, there are certain things that we can complement the department. So we support those sections, concerns and so forth, but let's use this opportunity. You'll recall a few years ago, the public, we were invited to comment on a so-called e-toll system. Most of us didn't realize what's going to happen until we started to see those gates in Gauteng. And it's years down the line. And because the public missed an opportunity to comment, e-toll are still there, whether people like it or not. So this is our opportunity. So we should not miss this opportunity to comment. In this process, we're going to provide you with guidelines and the FEDSAS summary, even a draft letter that you can use to comment. But the Portfolio Committee and the members of the committee would consider unique contributions. So we cannot simply copy and paste and all 2,000 member schools submit the same letter to the National Department and to the Portfolio Committee. It will count as a single contribution. So it's important for your school and your governing body to really consider the thorny issues and use our draft to help you to send in a unique contribution. And I emphasize unique, even if we send out 10,000 letters and the parents simply sign the petition form, 10,000 signatures will count as one contribution. So we are looking for unique contributions on your school's letterhead, signed by the chairperson of the governing body. Make it applicable to your school, but we'll get to that a bit later. We would like to monitor the process to make sure that when you submit something to Parliament, that it is considered. So our request today and to our members is, please send us a copy of what you sent to Parliament, that we can latch onto that when we make our written submissions and our oral presentation to that Portfolio Committee. So there's the FEDSAS email address. Send it to our legal officer too at FEDSAS, LO2, fetsas.org.za. And the closing date for comments is 4 o'clock on the 15th of June. So don't miss out. Still have sufficient time to consult. If you use the FEDSAS summary and your draft letter, you've got more than enough time to have your internal meetings and to send something very substantive. Parliament decided to make it easy for the general public to make submissions. So you've got three options. Mr. Llewellyn Brown is the secretary of that Portfolio Committee, and you can send him an email, and that's what we recommend. Use the email, that's BELA Bill 02@parliament.gov.za, and send a copy to us. But the parents, and I think that's the easy way to get your parents involved, is there's a Google form, an online form where you can say, I either support or I don't support, and give a very short comment. But I don't think there's sufficient space to really give substantive inputs. But maybe that's a useful way for parents to be involved. So there's a link to a Google form, or you can even send a WhatsApp, and there's the WhatsApp number. Now, I don't know who's going to read all those WhatsApps, so we recommend use that email address. Again, the important thing is it must be sent and delivered before the 15th of June, so we have time. Well, on BELAB, on the content, there are certain positive proposals. I mean, nobody can argue that will benefit when grade R are formally part of the school system. Johanna will touch on it. There are certain red lights, and she's going to start with those red lights. We need to take note of those. It will impact directly on the governing body and directly on our staff members. So Johanna will start with those. And we think there are still a few things missing. We've learned a few lessons from COVID, but we haven't seen it in the document. I think it's because it's now documented. It comes from 2017, but whilst we have an opportunity, let's bring in the lessons learned during that COVID process. But the bottom line is, don't miss the opportunity. We'd like to make it as easy as possible for you. So if you go to our website, on the landing page, you'll get that icon, the BELA Bill. Just click on it, and there you'll get all the FEDSAS documentation. You'll get our summary, the draft letter, and so forth. Please submit and send a copy to FEDSAS. I'm going to ask Johanna to open her camera and start her presentation. I'll be back a bit later. Thanks, Johanna.
Thank you very much, Jaco, and good afternoon to everyone. It's nice to be tuning in again from Bloemfontein. And here, this afternoon's topic is BELA, and Jaco have given you a proper explanation as to how to go about to submit your comment, where the route that BELA has taken up until now. And yeah, I'd like to share with you this afternoon a bit more of the specifics. If you want to prepare your comments, what are the red flags that you have to look out for and make sure you get strong comments on? What are the things that we are excited about, and so forth? So FEDSAS' approach in commenting on BELA was basically to consider this simple question: would the proposed amendments improve the quality of the education? And I think when the bill, or when the parliament approaches and goes through the process to amend a bill, we would like to see that those amendments would truly improve the quality of education. And the following red lights that we would like to highlight to you is those things that we do feel makes no contribution to the quality of education to the learners in South Africa. So we feel that this is actually a roadblock to working towards quality education for our schools in South Africa. Now, the first issue that I would like to highlight to you is, first of all, the disclosure of the financial interest of a governing body member. The proposed amendments requires a governing body member, and not just a governing body member, but he needs to disclose all the financial interest and information that he himself or herself, that a family member of him, a business partner of him, all and any financial interest that that specific person might have, he or she now has to disclose. Now, we went about in doing some research, and we found that not even the Public Finance Management Act nor the Companies Act requires such a broad disclosure of financial interest as is now proposed to be inserted into the Schools Act. And we feel that if this amendment is to be implemented, that this would truly discourage your regular parent member from serving on a governing body, because now all of a sudden he or she needs to disclose all financial interests that he or she might have before even being able to serve on a governing body. So we feel that this specific proposal is extreme. So that's why we feel that we're not going to support this specific amendment recommended by the department. Secondly, and I think there's been written quite a bit on this second bullet in the media, it's the governing body's power concerning the school's admissions policy. Now, as the Schools Act currently reads, It's the governing body that determines the school's admissions policy. Now, one of the proposed amendments now gives the HOD the power and the final authority to decide on the admission of a learner to a specific school. Now, that can only take place, or that authority can only be exercised once the HOD has gone through a consultation process, but that's one of the proposed amendments specifically concerning the admission policy. And then a second thing that I need to highlight is that schools now need to submit the admissions policy for approval to the HOD. And if the HOD is not happy with the content of that admission policy, he or she can return it to the school with the recommendations of changes he or she would like to see in that specific admissions policy. Now, to indicate and to highlight to you why we have issued a specific red light with regards to this amendment, I need to take a few steps back. I want to take us back to 1994, where we had a state, or pre-1994, where we had a state that was sovereign. So our state simply decided what should happen, and schools had no choice but to execute those decisions and those demands. Now, after 1994, our constitution developed, and we now have a cooperative governance model within our South African state. Just to give you an explanation as to how that works, we have our National Department of Education, our Provincial Department of Education, and then our school governing bodies. So the ideal envisioned by the Constitution is that those three partners should work together. Now, when we look at White Paper 1, that's the white paper upon which the Schools Act was written. White Paper 1 now envisaged and places the governance power within our schooling communities. Rather than having a state that's sovereign, we now have governing bodies, because we want to place the governance power within our school governing body to make the decisions on the governance within our schools. And then secondly, White Paper 1 also specifically states that we want minimal state intervention in the governance of our schools. So it's upon that goal which the Schools Act was written. And now, if we look at these proposed amendments, we're actually once again moving away from that cooperative governance model back to a position where we have a state that's sovereign. So that is the red lights that we have identified with these specific amendments containing to the admissions policy. Also, the powers concerning the language policy. Also, once again, schools are requested and required then to submit their language policies to the HOD once again for his or her approval. And perhaps I should just highlight that we have over 23,000 public schools in South Africa, and I cannot see how the HODs in our country will have the capacity to go through each and every language policy and to approve such policy. So that's another issue that one would have to consider specifically, looking at the language policies as well. Also, the proposed amendments now makes provision for the HOD to direct a school to use a second language of teaching within their school. I should just say there is a proper process that the HOD should go through before he or she can make such a direction. But once again, as I've explained with regards to the admissions policy, we're moving away from that cooperative governance model back to a state that's sovereign. And that's our greatest red flag, specifically concerning those amendments relating to the admissions policies and the language policies. When we talk about issues regarding admissions to schools, regarding language in schools, most of our disputes between the schools and the department would be because there is no capacity. There is simply not sufficient and enough schools within South Africa. And that would then lead to disputes. So we strongly feel that these proposed amendments is not the solution to the greater issue that we're currently experiencing in South Africa, specifically when we look at admissions. We strongly feel that there should be a proper capacity determination formula so that the parties, there's no dispute between the parties when we look at the capacity of the school. All parties should be in agreement with this is the formula that we are to use when we determine the school's capacity. And if the school is at full capacity, the obligation lies with the state to ensure that they build enough schools. So that's just one thing that I do want to highlight, and I do wish and hope to see in the comments coming from the public, coming from our member schools as well. So that's the greatest issues concerning the admissions and the language policy. Now, when we look at the powers concerning procurement, the state now wants to move in a direction where we will only have a centralized procurement process. Once again, this is a great big red light for us. As we've seen, a great example this year is the Eastern Cape Department that weren't able to deliver textbooks to schools right on time. We've also gotten feedback from our members that the quality of the products, the learning and teaching material received by the department or from the department is of poor quality. So even though it on paper makes sense that this a central procurement process would lead to better prices, we simply cannot see that our provincial education departments has the capacity to run a proper procurement process. So we feel strongly that this power should remain with our school governing bodies, especially those schools with the Section 21 functions. And then a very important bullet as well is the requirement that schools should now quarterly report on income and expenditure. We all know that schools, it's already a requirement that schools must submit their audited financial statements of the department every year. I haven't heard of one single school that has ever received an acknowledgement of receipt of their submitted audited statements. So we feel that this would just place an additional administrative burden on our schools, on our principals, on the administrative staff, and it would also impact on the resources of the schools. So we simply feel that the submission of the audited financial reports is sufficient. We don't even, as I've said, it's not even clear whether the department properly looks at those audited statements. So we don't see any need for the submission of quarterly reports as well, whilst the audited financial statements would be sufficient. Now, the positive proposals, which we are very excited about, is first of all, and Jack has already referred to the fact that grade R would now be made compulsory. That would also mean that the admission age for learners would now be 6 years and it's no longer 7 years. So we're really excited to see that we're moving in a direction where we're going to have grade R properly regulated. We're going to see our children in the schooling system a lot earlier, and we all know that the early developments of the children is so important. So we're really excited to see that this proposal is serving in Parliament now. The second one is the definition of corporal punishment. Incorporated in the Schools Act is a proper definition of corporal punishment. Unfortunately, we see and we get the reports from SACE that there's unfortunately still a lot of educators being removed from the role due to the fact that they are still making use of corporal punishment. So that's now clearly defined. So we're happy to see, and we trust that parents would also be happy that this is clearly defined. If there's any issue with regards to children being abused within schools, being subjected to corporal punishment, there's now a clear definition guiding us in that regard. The consumption or the sale of liquor during any school activity. No, we're not saying that we should now have school activities with learners involved and have the selling of liquor. No, not at all. We're happy to see that schools can now apply to the HOD for permission to sell liquor for fundraising purposes. And definitely one would not have the learners present during those fundraising activities, but we're truly happy to see that this is one thing that schools and practice has shown it. This is one thing through which schools tend to raise a lot of funds. So that's a positive inclusion in the Schools Act. This fourth bullet is something that has been discussed also for quite some time, for many years now, and we're also very happy to see that this has been incorporated. We have 9 sets of provincial election regulations, whilst we actually have 1 national election taking place. So it creates quite a bit of chaos when each province regulates its own elections. So we're happy to see that the elections will now be regulated or through uniform and national measures that will be determined by the minister. So this power will no longer be envisaged within the HOD and the MEC within our provinces. So we're truly happy to see that as well. There's a few amendments proposed that will criminalize a few actions. The first is the falsifying of information or the providing of false information to schools. I think schools would be happy to see this. I know schools struggle with parents providing false information when they apply for admission or when they apply for school fee exemptions. So hopefully this amendment would be a wake-up call to parents and would caution parents not to provide false information to schools. And then also the interruption of school activities would also be regarded as is regarded as a crime or would be regarded as a crime. So hopefully a lot less toy-toying and a lot more educating. So we're happy to see that. And then finally, and this is the one specific provision that I perhaps should just highlight and point out to you that this is not an amendment, a proposed amendment to the Schools Act. It is, however, a proposed amendment to the Employment of Educators Act. So it's specifically stated that state employees and educators may not conduct business with the state. It's actually a quite strict provision. It would now become an offence, and the educator and the state employee can also be charged with misconduct if he or she were to be caught doing business with the state. So we also support that specific provision. Yeah, so there's a few things missing. I'd quickly like to highlight things that we feel that should be incorporated into the Schools Act. Now, we know that during COVID, we've learned quite a few lessons. We were forced to resort to online meetings, having online elections, having online annual general meetings. So we hope to see, and we would like, and we are recommending that a clear definition of meetings is provided within the in the Schools Act. We'd like to see that this definition clearly makes provision for online meeting as well as in-person meetings or a hybrid meeting, with some members attending online and others in person. I think we are at this stage where it has been proven sufficient, where we can have greater parent involvement if we can have meetings or annual general meetings of to approve the budget online. So that's one thing that we do hope to see, and we're working towards. Secondly, what we also would like to, what we are recommending is the right to appeal the HOD's decision to expel a specific learner. Currently, the Schools Act only makes provision for a learner to appeal to the MEC once the HOD has made his or her decision to expel a learner. No such right is awarded to the school. We feel strongly that the school should also have the right to appeal the HOD's decision. So we're making that recommendation. And then also, if the HOD fails to make a decision within the prescribed time as set out in the Schools Act, we feel strongly about the fact that the learner who is up for expulsion should not return to school. He or she should stay at home until the time that the HOD has made his or her decision, specifically to protect the learners that fell victim of the misconduct of that specific learner. Yes, so we want to see that the MECs to be compelled to provide sufficient schools, educators, and funding. It's been quite some time since our school funding model, our school staffing model has been reviewed. We think that the current models only makes provision for single language medium schools, and it's high time that those models also be reviewed, and we want to see the MECs compelled in that regard. Is the establishment of NCF and Pcfs as statutory bodies. These bodies has been functioning on an informal agreement, or well, it's actually a formal written agreement, but there's no statutory and these bodies is not established in terms of our rules. And that's what we'd like to see. We know our unions have the Education Labour Relation Council. That's a statutory body within which they can conclude agreements, they can negotiate, and so forth. So we are also recommending that the National Consultative Forum and our Provincial Consultative Forums should be recognized in statute as well, to grant them the same rights and a statutory platform upon which these bodies can also negotiate, go about, conclude agreements, and so forth. Section 21, we'd like to see that Section 21 to be amended. We want to expand the functions of well-functioning governing bodies. So that's a recommendation. Keep a lookout for the comment on our FEDSAS website for more detail on that specific proposal of ours. And then finally, Section 37(1). In terms of that specific section, it's the member of the Executive Council that would determine directions to administer school funds. Once again, as with the school governing body elections, we see that it's quite, we're not convinced that the expertise lies within our provincial education departments to properly issue directions to schools to administer school funds. So we also feel that this power should be vested with the Minister of Education, so it can be regulated nationally. So these are some of the things that we feel are missing, and which we would make clear comments on. And then finally, for our independent schools, all of the previous 3 slides was applicable to our public schools. For our independent schools, there's actually just one proposed amendment. That's Section 48 of the South African Schools Act. I have included it on the screen over here. This would basically now require that the member of the Executive Council would determine conditions upon which schools or within which schools must abide if they wish to apply for a subsidy, and then they would also have additional reporting requirements. If they do receive a subsidy, they will have to report on a quarterly basis to the HOD. That's the only proposed amendments for our independent schools currently in the BELA Bill. Once again, I would like to share this slide with you again. If you haven't done so yet, please quickly take a screenshot. Just once again to confirm where you can submit your comments to. Once again, as Jaco has also pointed out, please make sure that you also send it to FEDSAS at LO2. at FEDSAS.org.za. So we can also make sure that your comments get to Parliament. But the correct email is BELABill02 at parliament.gov.za. Yeah, so in a nutshell, I'm going to conclude with this slide just to give you an overview as to what BELA entails and where we're going and what we're currently looking at.
Thanks for that, Joanne. So something about the good, the bad, and the ugly, but we're not calling the good, the bad, and ugly. We say there's something's missing. So thanks for that. There's a question. I think you can stop your screen, stop your share. Thank you, Joanne. Thanks. There's a good comment asking the question about decentralization. Isn't FEDSAS in our approach focusing only on the quintile 4 and 5 schools, the fee-paying schools? And that answer is no. It actually boils down to the construct of our schools in terms of the SA Schools Act. The Schools Act moved away from state schools. What we see in amendments are actually taking us back to the so-called state schools. Now just pause there. If you look at the current state institutions, would you like to have a state school? Go to the public facilities and buildings and look at how does it look? Are the people happy in those buildings? Are they providing a quality service? And I would definitely, as a parent, say I wouldn't like to go back to a state school system. So we need to emphasize the fact that public schools belongs to that school community. And the problem is not the act. The problem is, in terms of the act, the department is supposed, all 9 provinces are supposed to provide quality training to all the governing body members in order to fulfill their functions. So when we talk about the dysfunctional school or a dysfunctional governing body, that would be the fault of their own school community. Obviously, the department need to take responsibility because they're supposed to train. But if we decide as a community, we don't want public schools where we take ownership, we're going to hand it back to the state, I think we're in serious trouble. The minister, I understand her dilemma as well. If we don't have functioning schools and if we don't have functioning governing bodies, then she needs to pull in those powers. But that's already in the Schools Act. If governing bodies don't fulfill the obligations, you've got Section 22. If they don't do things the way it should happen, she can use Section 25. There can be interventions, but I think the bottom line is, as communities, we need to take responsibility for our own schools, whether there's school fees involved or no school fees involved. At the end of the day, like Joanne pointed out, is this really in the best interest of our children? And on that note, I would again like to plead with you as our members and as members of public to use the opportunity to let your voice be heard. There's the contact details. You've got until the 15th of June to do that. Visit our website, make use of our documentation, let it be a guideline for you, and please submit that unique contribution before the 15th. So thank you for joining us in this session. We would like to answer a few questions. The independent schools, indeed, just your name made a comment about that independent school. The only provision is about those schools who will receive the subsidy. And I presume it's to curb those fly-by-night schools where they'll receive that subsidy and next year they're gone. But if you're at an independent school, I think it's important to comment on that specific section. It's item 36 or 38, Joanna, I'm not sure now, but dealing with section 48 of the Schools Act. Exactly the same process. You send your comment to the portfolio committee and just highlight that you're an independent school and you would like to give a comment on that specific section. So Paul, with that, back to you. Thank you for joining us in this webinar.
Start again. Thank you, everybody. There was a bit of a 2019 error there that I didn't put the mic on. Thank you very much, Jaco and Jeanne. I'm not going to spend much time in signing off. You will receive a follow-up email with necessary details a copy of the discussion that did take place. There will be a recording as well that will come through to you within 24 hours that you'll get all that information. So with that, I'm going to bid you farewell. Thank you very much for your involvement. Please feel free to pass on the information to others. I think the most important word that does come out is that you need to comment, and you need to comment individually as much as possible. So with that message, thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon. Cheerio.